Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. Today, we're going to talk about economic growth and productivity. We will see what exactly productivity is and why is it important in economic growth, and what can we do to enhance productivity and economic growth in countries. One thing we notice across the world is that there is a huge variation in GDP per capita, which is basically GDP divided by the total population across countries. So there are some countries that are very wealthy, and then there are some countries that are considered to be very poor. Now, if we look at countries, I got this from the World Bank. This is a website of the World Bank. If you go in and you can search for what is the values of GDP per capita for each country. Now, this one is GDP per capita of, or what we call PPP, which means that the prices have been standardized across the world, and then we are looking at level of GDP per capita across each country. So here we see that the poorest country, according to that, is Burundi, where an average person earns about $774.5 a year. And then if we go to the richest country in the world, it's Luxembourg, which earns $133,363 per year. If we look at the United States, it is down here at around a little less than $70,000 a year. So we do see huge variations. So the richest is Luxembourg, Singapore, and Ireland, and then we go all the way down. We see Canada's down here at 52,000. And then if we go down, we can look at China is somewhere around 20,000, so it's around 19,338. So one thing that economists want to know is, why are some countries rich and others are poor? So we look at different factors that could affect it, and one of the things that we know that affects the income between different countries is what we call productivity, which is, in a nutshell, it is the ability to produce goods and services using fewer resources. So the more productive we are, the more efficient we are. So they are synonyms, productivity and efficiency. We can use them interchangeably, but basically productivity is measuring how quickly or how efficiently we can produce goods and services. Let's say if somebody, one example can be, if someone, let's say if John can mow the lawn in 1 hour and Jim mows the same lawn in 40 minutes, then Jim is more productive than John. So presumably if they're using the same resources, the same or the lawnmower and the same fuel source, that's the electricity, to mow the lawn, then Jim mowing at using less time means that Jim is more productive than John. So in countries too, the more productive the workforce, the higher is the production of goods and services. And you can imagine it this way: the more productive the workforce, let's take the example of, again, John and Jim. If Jim can show that, look, I can mow the lawn in 40 minutes, Jim can ask for a higher wage or a higher payment than John. So higher productivity can lead to higher wages. So a country that is more productive not only can produce more goods and services, but their workers can also ask for higher wages. So countries that are more productive tend to be richer. So countries that are more productive tend to be richer. And normally we measure, let's say if my output is, we denote it by the letter Y, or we also call it real GDP, and my labor, which is L. Now labor can be units of labor, so individuals, or it could be hours of labor. So it could be either. Some books use it as units of labor, or some says hours given to labor, hours provided. So it could be either, depending upon the book or depending upon how we are talking. But basically, in either case, we can say productivity equals y over L. So this is telling us that if my output is y, my total output is y, and I'm using L units of labor to produce y, then my productivity, average productivity, is y over L. So from here, we can say that a country like Luxembourg or someone like Singapore has a higher productivity than a country like Burundi. So, and economists use this idea that increase in productivity growth can help us earn more income and help countries get richer. So how do we measure productivity for a nation? So we take, first of all, we talk about, but before we do that, let's learn about how do we measure productivity growth. So let's say we have a country 1, where Y in 2016 is 5 billion and L in 2016 is 3 million. And then in 2017 is 5.8 billion and L in 2017 is 3.2 million. So what is the growth rate of GDP of Y over L, or GDP per worker? So in that case, first, if I have this information given, then I can find Y over L in 2016 would be equal to 5 billion. So I'm just counting units, 100,000, 10,000, 100,000, million, 10 million, 100 million, divided by 5 billion, divided by 3 million, which becomes 1,666.67. Now, that in 2017 would be 5,8 divided by 3,2, 1812.5. So now, what is the growth rate of Y over L? It would be the change in the value over those 2 years. So 1812.5 minus 1666.67 divided by 1666.67 times 100, which comes out to be 8.75%. So we will say that between 2016 and 2017, productivity grew by 8.75% in the country. Now let's look at how productivity is measured in a country and what factors determine productivity. We are going to use a production function to understand how to measure productivity or function of the economy. So a production function is basically the method of combining inputs to output. It can be an equation, it can be a graph. So we are going to use an equation. So we will say it's an equation that helps us to see how inputs are converted to output. So the way we use it is we say Y, which is my GDP, equals A times F of K, comma, L, comma, H, comma, N. And I'll go through all these notations in a bit. So we talked about what Y is and L is. So Y is my real GDP. L is labor. So it could be units of labor, like a number of workers working, or it could be hours of labor, total hours of labor provided by a certain number of workers. Then we have K, which is going to be capital. So workers need some level of capital to work. So even if, let's say, to mow a lawn, I could use a simple tool like a big scissor to cut the grass, or I could use a lawnmower. Both are capital, but one capital is more efficient than the other one. So labor with more efficient capital can be able to produce more out. And then we have H, which we call human capital. Human capital is basically the ability to know how to work the capital, or basically the skills, knowledge, education that we have acquired over time. So giving somebody a lawnmower and the person doesn't know how to use the lawnmower, because the person doesn't know, does it use electricity or does it use some kind of fuel like kerosene? How do you run this lawnmower? If they don't know, then they will not be able to get the proper output. Finally, we have N, which is natural resources. So this is some kind of a physical space. We basically get all our output, they all basically come from the land. So land does not include natural resources, just does not include land. It also includes fuel, minerals that we use. So like in our cell phone, we have different kinds of elements that help us run the cell phone. We use copper wires in our electricity to conduct electricity from power plants to our homes, and many other things that we extract from the soil or from the air. So all these things combine into F. F is basically an equation that shows how inputs are combined to output. Now, we are not going to talk exactly what F looks like. Basically, F could be 2K plus 3L plus 5H plus, let's say, 7N. That could be one version of F. Or another version could be, we could have 2K squared plus 3L to the power cube plus H 5H and plus natural log of N. We could have another function like this. So in this case, we are not going to go really deep into what F looks like, but we know F has these four functions in it. Finally, A, this is the level of technology in the economy. So A tells us how efficiently we are using the inputs to produce output. So these are all the notation that we have. And just to recap, if we think about it, like to produce something, I need to put in some hours of work, which is my labor. I need some kind of knowledge about what I'm doing, so I need human capital. I need tools and machinery to work, so I need some capital. And of course, I need something from the land for work. I need to be set up on land. I need minerals from the land. So if I'm a carpenter, I need to get lumber from the land. I need probably a saw or a chainsaw or something to cut to cut my lumber. That is made of steel, which comes from iron, and iron comes from the soil, and I use coal and other minerals to convert iron to steel. So all those things are basically, they start from somewhere from nature. And A tells us what level of technology we have. So I could put in all these things into my production, but A is telling us how efficiently or easily we can produce that output. Now, one thing we will assume here is we will assume that the production function has constant returns to scale. This means that if I increase all the input, not technology, so not A, but K, L, H, and N by the same proportion, then output will increase by that same proportion. Which means that if I go bring this out down here, let's say, so if this is my production function, now if I increase K, L, H, N by a factor of 3, then output will also increase by a factor of 3. If I increase, let's say now we say that Y increases by a factor of 1.5, or sorry, yeah, K, all the inputs K, L, H, and N, they all increase by a factor of 1.5, then my Y will also increase by a factor of 1.5. However, let's say if one of the factors increase, let's say K increases by 1.5 and everything else remains the same. So we start with, let's say, if we are now comparing these two numbers, let's say initially we had just K, L, H, N, and then my level of capital went up by 1.5 times. In that case, y will go up, but not by 1.5 times. It will go up probably 0.2 times, 0.3 times. It will go up a little bit, or probably it will go up by, let's say, by a smaller proportion, but it will be less than 1.5 times. So in that case, if one of the inputs just increase, but not all the other inputs, y will go up, but by a lesser extent. So in this case, what we can say is, if I take this production function, and now if I basically multiply all the inputs by 1 over L, so then I'm writing K times 1 over L, and then L times 1 over L, H times 1 over L, and N times 1 over L. So if I do that, then Y will also be multiplied by 1 over L. In that case, I can see that. So then I can see my Y over L becomes, L over L becomes 1. So I'll just remove that. So this tells me that Y over L, as we talked before, was productivity. So productivity depends upon the level of technology, capital per worker, human capital per worker, and natural per worker. Natural resources per worker. Now let's look at each of these factors, and then we can talk about why are they important, and what, and more importantly, what they are, why are they important, and how can they increase productivity and economic growth and general well-being of the country. So let's look at capital per worker. So capital, basically, as we said, capital is the tools, machinery, or buildings that we use to produce more output. So capital, it can be tools like, hammer, can be like hammer, or like farm tools like, maybe some kind of spade and other tools. It can also be like factory. It can be computers, maybe other machinery like tractors and other goods and or things, tools that we use for more production. Now imagine, like, let's say I am typing something, or I have to write something. So if I have to write, I can write using pen and paper, or I can write using a typewriter, or I can write using a computer. So I can use 3 different methods for writing the same thing. Now, as I can see, if I write it using pen and paper, I may be very slow, and if I make any errors, then I may have to rewrite the whole thing. With typewriter, I may be a little faster in typing, but if I make an error, I have to redo the whole thing again. With a computer, I can actually write much faster. I can also edit as I go and revise my writing as much as possible before I submit the main paper. So I can see that, like, I have the same labor. I'm putting in hours into writing this document, but a computer will make it much faster. So if I have a computer, I can write much faster. So then I can say that, similarly, having capital can make a worker more productive. So if all workers have capital, or have some level of capital, they would be more productive than workers without any capital. So imagine if I have to write something and I have a computer, I can write something really fast compared to somebody who has to write using pen and paper. So capital per worker, so increasing capital per worker would increase productivity. But this does not mean that if I continue to provide capital to a worker, that productivity will continue to increase. The reason is, let's say that if I draw a curve here to show that capital and output, they have a kind of a diminishing return. So if I put capital per worker here, capital per labor, and productivity here, the shape will be kind of like this. So initially, if I go from a little bit of capital to a lot of capital, the increase in output will be quite a lot. So my productivity will go up quite a bit. But if I already have a lot of capital, and if I increase more capital, so I provide the workers even more capital, then the effect or the increase in productivity will not be as much. It may increase, but it won't be as much. So what this means is that let's say that you have, let's say you already have a computer. So if I already have a computer and I want to write something using a computer, that's fine. So if I have a computer, getting another computer will not really increase my productivity. So in this case, similar with workers, if the workers already have one set of tools, giving them more tools may not increase their productivity. It may increase a little bit, but not as much as this group. So this then shows if you're a poorer country, if you have low K over L, you can get a much bigger increase in productivity if you increase your capital per worker. But if you already have high K over L, then if I continue to increase capital, it's not going to have much of an effect on my productivity. So capital over worker, increasing capital over worker can increase productivity, but at a diminishing rate. Increasing capital per worker can increase productivity, but at a diminishing rate. So poorer countries can increase productivity by increasing capital per worker. Now, how would they do that? Well, capital is any kind of, as we said in an earlier lecture on GDP, investment means creating capital for production of more goods and services. So governments can promote investment in order to increase capital per worker. So one way government can do that is just provide incentives to local entrepreneurs to invest more, or government can ask foreign companies to set up factories in a country. And this is what we call foreign direct investment, or FDI. So one example is like when BMW opened a factory in South Carolina. That is an FDI into the US. Similarly, when Intel opened a factory in Vietnam, then that is an FDI into Vietnam. So they can ask if there is not enough entrepreneurs or not enough skills to produce more goods and services or invest more within a country, the government can ask foreign companies to come in and set up factories in a country. Government can also ask, there can also be foreign portfolio investment where companies invest in a local company, or let's say where foreign companies, but let the local company run its own business. So it could be that, if when GM invested in Volvo, that is one example of foreign portfolio investment. GM bought a part of Volvo, which is a Swedish company, and then they were like, okay, we bought some shares, we may give you some technology and some know-how as to how to run the company, but we'll let Volvo operate as its own entity and not as part of GM. So in a poor country, also even in the US, the government wants to promote investment and bring in more FDI from other countries in order to increase productivity by increasing capital per worker. But that capital per worker is also dependent upon what we would call human capital per worker. This is the education, skills, training that workers acquire over time. So human capital makes us more skilled. So if you're going to school, the knowledge you're gaining from education, the training you're getting in schools, maybe you're taking different courses in different fields, that's enhancing your knowledge over time. You may be learning different software skills or different soft skills, interpersonal skills that helps you communicate effectively with others. So all these things help us become more efficient. But human capital also helps us to learn to work capital. So if I did not know how to run a computer, then if I did not have the human capital of like running a computer, then I would not know how to use a computer, even if one was given to me. So human capital helps us to understand how to produce the goods. And human capital is not only like, like research scientists doing work, it's also things like a carpenter knowing how to effectively or efficiently make a table, or a plumber knowing where to look for, let's say, to fix problems in a house, or water issues in a house. So all those are human capital. And increases in human capital can make us more efficient. So how do we increase human capital in a country? So government takes steps to increase human capital by providing education to all. So in many countries, education is free. In the US, it's free up to the 12th grade, and then afterwards, there are subsidies provided to education. Or if a student has to pay full tuition to go to school, they may be able to take a loan to go to school. So governments provide education to all. Sometimes governments can subsidize skills learning. So like if you want to learn a new skill, you may go to a community college where the tuition is low, and government subsidizes that tuition for you so that you can pick up a new skill. Government can also, in many countries, government send students abroad for higher education so that they can come back and help the country. So all those things helps us to increase human capital of an individual. The next one is natural resources per worker. So natural resources are very important, as we said, that usually countries rich in natural resources can be wealthy. And we see that in some cases like in Norway, Saudi Arabia, but there are also countries rich in natural resources that are not so wealthy. So countries that are rich in natural resources may also not be wealthy, like Congo. There are also other countries like Japan and Singapore have very few natural resources, but they are wealthy. So in that case, we see that natural resources does help in some respects, but it's not absolutely necessary for productivity growth. But it is a good thing to have. If a country can use it effectively, then it can add to economic growth and rising productivity. Finally, we have technology. This is any method that helps to enhance our productivity. So technology is anything that improves our way of working and way of living. So how do we do technology? Technology is basically enhanced by research. So in America, a lot of things, governments conduct research. So there are many government institutions that specifically do research in the US. In the US, universities also conduct a lot of research. And then finally, companies conduct a lot of research. So every thing that happens, so let's say government, we have companies like, or institutions like NASA doing research about space, but they have also contributed in many things that we see in our daily life. And universities at almost all levels do conduct a lot of research trying to find out different things. Companies too, if you think about Apple producing the iPhone, that was an improvement in technology. All those things existed, but Steve Jobs kind of combined them in a way that made it easier for us to use the phone to access internet. Now, a lot of times students ask, like, what is the difference between human capital and technology? They seem similar. They are connected with each other. So human capital and technology, how are they any different? So human capital, technology, you can think about it's all the advances that we have done so far. So like, let's say electricity and transportation and all those things that we have created. So technology is the whole sum total of all the information, all the research that we have done so far. So technology is the sum total of all that information. As a human, I cannot get all those information in my head. So human capital is basically mastering or learning a very small amount of that technology. So imagine, let's say I am an accountant. So my job is to work with numbers. I know how to work balance sheets, produce income statements, and so on. But I rely on computers to do the work. So I may use Excel or other computers like QuickNotes and other software to do all that work. But I don't know anything about how Excel works or how a computer processes information. All I know is that I know how to use Excel, but I don't know exactly how Excel does all the work, like how it stores numbers, how it uses the RAM and all that. I don't know how the internet works when I'm downloading the data to my computer. I don't know how that data is coming into my computer. I know it's coming in. There are engineers and other scientists who know how that works. I just know that given all those information about a company, all the numbers about a company, I can create balance sheets and income statements. So my human capital is only that, but I'm using all those other technologies in order to do my human capital. So if you notice that, so if I'm an accountant, yes, improvements in computers does help me, even though it's not directly in my field, but I will use that product, which is a computer, to help me enhance my work. So technology is really important. And how do governments encourage technology creation? Well, governments provide incentives for technology to be produced. So companies may get tax breaks if they do research, and then governments also provide grants to conduct research. The US has institutions like the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Health that provides grants for research, and those research are then used to improve our daily lives. So these are the factors that go directly into the production function. Now, there are other factors too that could affect our productivity and economic growth. One obvious one that we can think about is health. If the workers are healthy, they will be more productive. So improvements in healthcare, improvements in disease diagnosis and curing and prevention can help us become more productive. So if a nation improves its healthcare, and healthcare does not just mean hospitals and doctors, it also means like public health and also providing access to better quality food and cleaner environment so that we can live in a better society when it comes to like cleaner or less pollution. It also means that we have better access to medicine and other, let's say, post-operation care that helps us to get better. So if a nation improves its healthcare, which means like hospitals, public health, after operation care, and then access to medicines, etc., then workers can be healthier and so can be more productive. So health becomes very important. In many countries, hunger is a main issue. So if a government can reduce the incidence of hunger, productivity will go up. So health becomes more important when it comes to the workers working more efficiently. Another thing is that we say is important is rule of law. A country with a strong rule of law will encourage workers and companies to invest more. If there is no rule of law, then my property could be confiscated by not just the government, but by other individuals. And in those countries, companies are very reluctant to invest. Also, with strong rule of law, individuals are also interested in investing in human capital. They want to make sure they learn more so that they are able to work and earn a lot more. If there was no strong rule of law, if there is a chance that they will be killed because of internal fights and civil wars, then there is no need to invest in human capital, and so workers will be less productive. We also have trade becomes important. We learned how important international trade. So international trade can make us more productive because countries tend to specialize in goods that they are more productive in producing. And so these other factors can also help us in enhancing our productivity. They are not directly affecting us, but they do help us to increase our productivity by providing us with better health, better safety, and access to a bigger market. Hopefully this was beneficial, and I will see you at a later video. Have a good day. Goodbye.